Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly 30 minutes of Torah study for the Torah portion of Yisro. We'll begin with a brief overview of the Torah portion. So the Torah portion begins with Yisro, who's Moshe's father-in-law. He joins the Jewish people in the desert. He hears about the splitting of the Red Sea. He hears about the war with Amalek, and he joins the Jewish people together with Moshe's wife and Moshe's sons. He joins the Jewish people and he sees that Moshe is all day long, morning to night, discussing, giving advice, answering questions in Jewish law to the Jewish people. And Yisro, as any good father-in-law would do, gives his son-in-law some fabulous and fantastic advice. Yisro says to Moshe, you got to appoint some people. You got to delegate, right? You have to give yourself a break. The toughest questions, they'll come to you. But appoint judges, rabbis, delegate, and give other people a chance to answer questions as well. The Torah is not in chronological order. The Torah then reverts a little back in time to before the Torah was given and tells us how the Jewish people are camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. They are given the message that God has chosen them to be his kingdom of priests and they're to be a holy nation. The Jews respond quite beautifully, all that God has spoken, we shall do. The Torah and the Ten Commandments are given, right? Moshe ascends the mountain, God descends on the mountain. There is fireworks, there's thunder, there's lightning. The Torah actually says that you could see the thunder, you could hear the lightning. It was an unbelievable, miraculous event. The Torah is given to the Jewish people. So now let's go into the Torah portion itself. So we just mentioned that the Torah is given. This is a radical event that completely changes the direction of the history of the world. Not just the history of the Jewish people, but the entire history of the world is impacted and is affected by the giving of the Torah. Almost all of the modern Western values that people hold dear and cherish today actually originate within the Torah, made their way from the Torah, from the Jewish people, into the rest of the society we know. The world today, without a Torah, would be inconceivable. We would not be able to comprehend the world without the Torah because we are the beneficiaries of living in a world for over 3,000 years with the Torah. The Torah is given, spirituality is given, mitzvahs are given. It truly was a one-time experience. Not just once in a lifetime, it's a once in history experience that God would reveal himself to the entirety of the Jewish people at one time. Now, Rashi comments that in addition to the fact that God revealed himself to the entirety of the Jewish people, and that being a one-time experience, there was another, unfortunately, one-time in history experience that took place as well. Rashi comments on it. He says, are we here? Okay. He says, Israel encamped there. The Hebrew word for encamped, vayichan, is in the singular form, denoting that they encamped there as one person with one heart, as opposed to all the other encampments that were divided with complaints and strife. So what was unique about the giving of the Torah is that the Jewish people were united like one man with one heart. They truly felt that we are brothers and sisters. One agenda, one plan, one purpose. Never did the Jewish people experience something like that again. Throughout the rest of the Torah, there's challenges, there's fights, there's issues, there's problems, there's obstacles. It was a one-time experience that at Mount Sinai, there was a unity like never before. Now, from time to time, the Jewish people do experience a similar type of unity, but unfortunately, it's not as a result of being united with one mind, one heart, one purpose to receive the Torah. It's as a result of a tragedy, right? It's a result of a terrorist attack. This past Shabbos, when Shabbos concluded, everyone found out, everyone heard the news that there's a hostage situation, a terrorist attack in a shul. Every Jew no matter what yarmulke you wore, no matter what colored tallis you wore, whether you wore one or not, man, woman, religious, not religious, we were one, right? With one man, with one heart, with one soul. But unfortunately, right, it's the tragedies that unite us. But at the giving of the Torah, right, it was the coming together for the purpose of receiving the Torah. Every Jew was equal, and every Jew received the Torah equally, standing at Mount Sinai. Now, in theory, this is a very beautiful idea, but on a practical level, it's not so simple, it's not so straightforward to make this statement. Can we actually say that at Mount Sinai, every single Jew equally received the Torah? What about a person who has disabilities and is not able to perform a particular mitzvah? So to give you an example, what about a person who is deaf? A person who is deaf cannot hear a thing, not one sound, nothing. How is that person able to experience the mitzvah of the shofar? Can you say that this person received the mitzvah of the shofar? Can you say that person is a part of it? How does that Jew, right, have an ownership claim in the mitzvah of hearing the shofar when the person can't say anything? Is this person missing out? Is this person excluded? Does this person somehow stand outside of the rest of the Jewish people who receive the Torah? The Medrash actually comments on this issue. The Medrash says, Rabbi Eliezer says, to inform us of the greatness of Israel, the Torah tells us that when they stood together at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, they did not have among them any blind people, as it says, and the whole nation saw. The Torah tells us they did not have among them any mutes, as it is stated, and the whole nation responded as one. The Torah teaches that they did not have among them deaf people, as it is stated, all that God says we will do and we will hear. How do we know that they did not have among them lame people? Because it is stated, and they stood at the bottom of the mountain. The Medrash tells us that the Jewish people were miraculously healed when they stood at Mount Sinai. So every single Jew was equally a part of all of the Torah mitzvahs. There was no deaf person at Mount Sinai who was not able to hear the shofar. Now that's great for them. That's wonderful, the Jews who are at Mount Sinai, who truly can feel included in the fullest possible way in the totality of Torah mitzvahs. But what about today? There are no miracles happening today. Unfortunately, there are people who are deaf today, who have various disabilities that prevent them from hearing, from participating in the Torah. Do we say that those people are missing? Based on this medrash, you could say yes. Why did God heal everyone who stood at Mount Sinai? To include everyone. That would mean if they were deaf or were blind, they would not be included. So how do we understand a person with disabilities' relationship to the Torah? So strictly from a halachic perspective, from a legal perspective, they are not missing anything at all. From a Torah perspective, the person is exempt from that mitzvah, cannot be held against you. And very simply what that means is it's not your job, right? It's not your responsibility. It's not your obligation. You're not missing anything. You're not lacking anything because you have this disability. Now, are you satisfied with this answer? It's a very technical answer, right? It's a very legalistic type of answer. Okay, it can't be held against you in a court of law. Fabulous. However, there still is another issue, because a mitzvah doesn't just mean a commandment. The word mitzvah means a connection. How can someone be exempt of the opportunity to connect with God? If we view every single mitzvah so precious, so valuable, like winning the lottery, how would you feel if someone said, oh, you are exempt from winning the lottery? Yes, Gary, you have a question? Go for it.
Is this somewhat similar to the fact that we are all exempt from mitzvot because we don't have a Beit Hamikdash, we're not living in the land of Israel for other mitzvot?
Yes, right. It's not the exact same argument as we're going to see at the conclusion of the class, but we are going to be making a similar argument. So it's a similar question, but I'm going to be a little bit more precise in the question than when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash. So Gary, if someone said to you, you are exempt from winning the lottery, how would you feel about that? There's $100 million sitting in your net. Oh, you're exempt. What do you mean I'm exempt, right? How can someone be exempt of the opportunity to connect with God? Sounds like you're missing out on something.
Like Tevye said, choose somebody else.
That's right. That's right. Let someone else be exempt, right?
Right.
What is the relationship of a disabled person to the Torah? All right. Let's go to, in order to really understand this, we need to really explore the idea of the concept of exemptions for people with disabilities. The example that the Talmud discusses is a person who's blind. Now, is a person who is blind capable of doing mitzvahs? The answer is yes. Is it a challenge? Absolutely. Right? A person who is visually impaired, a person who is blind, is going to have life. It will be more difficult. However, it's doable. Some mitzvahs you can do by yourself. Some mitzvahs you might need the assistance, the help, the aid of another person. But even for a person who is blind, the person is capable of doing mitzvahs. But is the blind person obligated in doing mitzvahs? So the majority of sages say yes. A blind person is obligated in the mitzvahs. However, there's a great sage, his name was Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says a blind person is exempt from mitzvahs. And by the way, he says a blind person not only is exempt from positive mitzvahs, like blowing the shofar, eating matzah on Pesach, or putting on tefillin, the person is even exempt from negative commandments. That means the person can eat non-kosher. According to Rabbi Yehuda, a person who is blind is completely exempt from mitzvahs. But what if they want to do it? What if a blind person says, I would like to eat matzah at the Seder. It's Pesach. Everyone's doing it, the whole family. So I don't have to, but I want to. We're all sitting at the Seder. Let me join in. Let me participate in this mitzvah. So we go to the Gemara, and the Gemara says, Rav Yosef, leading Talmudic sage, who was blind, he said, when I heard that someone ruled in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda, who said that blind people are exempt from mitzvahs, I declared a festive day for the sages. Why? Because I am not commanded to do the mitzvahs, and yet I do them nonetheless. So when Rav Yosef heard that a person who is blind is exempt from doing mitzvahs, from his perspective, this was a cause for celebration. Why was it a cause for celebration? Because anyone else is doing the mitzvah because they have to. They're commanded to do it. They're obligated to do it. There's no choice. There's no option not to. But for Rav Yosef, he was doing it purely and solely out of his love for God, out of his affection for God. He embraced the fact that he was not doing it by force. He was doing it by choice. We see here from the story of Rabbi Yosef that there is tremendous value in doing mitzvahs, even if you are exempt. To the extent that Rabbi Yosef felt maybe there's something even more special than doing it when you're commanded. Because when you're commanded, you have no choice. But when you do it on your own, that mitzvah can truly be attributed to you. However, the Talmud continues. And the Talmud says, now that I've heard Rabbi Chanina's statement, Rabbi Yosef continued, that one who is commanded to do the mitzvahs has a greater reward than one who is not commanded to do the mitzvahs, I declare a festive day for the sages whenever I hear someone rule that the law is not in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because as one who is commanded, I have a greater reward. So Rav Yosef says, when I thought that I was exempt, I celebrated because I'm doing the mitzvah even though I'm not commanded, and that's very special. However, now that I learn that I'm obligated, I'm celebrating even more. Says why? You can't compare a person who's obligated to one who's not obligated. For example, you can't compare a person who works for Microsoft versus a volunteer at Microsoft. It's valuable that you're volunteering at Microsoft. It's wonderful that you're volunteering, but you're not getting a 401k for that, right? It's just different. So Rav Yosef, when he learned that he is obligated, he rejoiced even more because of the reward that a person who is obligated is going to receive. Rav Yosef then said, right, on the holiday of Shavuos, Rav Yosef said, prepare for me a choice third-born calf. In explanation, he continued, for without the holiday of Shavuos, which of course is the holiday where we celebrate the giving of the Torah, he says, how many Yosefs would be in the marketplace? He says his whole life, his whole meaning, his whole purpose, his whole direction in life is as a result of the Torah. So the Torah was so central to the life of Rabbi Yosef, even though for much of his life he thought that he was exempt from doing mitzvahs in the Torah, nevertheless he still did it and had tremendous value in it. Rav Yosef was overjoyed for the opportunity he had to rise above his disabilities. With his appreciation for Torah, he was doing incredibly godly things. So no matter where you slice it, observing Torah and mitzvahs, doing mitzvahs is good. If you're obligated in it, it's fabulous. If you're not obligated and you do it anyway, it's fabulous, right? If you're a disabled person, doing Torah mitzvahs is fabulous, it's valuable, and it's wonderful. So, and specifically when it comes to disabled people, right, the value of doing mitzvahs is tremendously high. Check out this fabulous text here from the Rebbe. He writes, the actual practice of mitzvahs in everyday life provides a tangible way by which these special people of all ages can, despite their handicap, identify with their families and with other fellow Jews in their surroundings, and generally keep in touch with reality. Even if mentally they may not fully grasp the meaning of these rituals, subconsciously they are bound to feel at home in such an environment, and in many cases could participate in such activities also on the conscious level. To cite one striking example from actual experience during the festival of Sukkot this year, as is well known, Lubavitch activists on this occasion reach out to many Jews with a lulav and esrog, bringing them the spirit of the season of our rejoicing. This year being a year of Hakel, the year of gathering following the sabbatical year, I urge my followers to extend this activity as much as possible to include also nursing homes and senior citizens hotels, as well as other institutions. I was asked, what should be the attitude and approach to persons who are senile or confused? I replied, all the more reason to reach out to them in this tangible way. Well, the reports were profoundly gratifying. Doctors and nurses were astonished to see such a transformation. Persons who had spent countless days in silent immobility, deeply depressed and oblivious to everything around them, the moment they saw a young man walk in with a lulav and esrog in his hand, suddenly displayed a lively interest, eagerly grasped the proffered mitzvah objects, some of them reciting the blessing from memory without prompting. The joy in their hearts shone through their faces, which had not known a smile all too long. Just because a person may be technically exempt from a mitzvah does not mean that they are disconnected from that mitzvah. That person is absolutely a part of it, as we saw from Rav Yosef, that even when he was not obligated, he felt they were my mitzvahs. I'm a part of it, and I want to do them, and I want to observe them. So how can someone be exempt of the opportunity to connect with God? The godliness from all mitzvahs is, in theory at least, available to everyone, even those with disabilities. Whether obligated or not obligated, that mitzvah is a part of you, and there is the ability to access that mitzvah in a very meaningful way. But everything that we just said applies to a person who's capable of doing the mitzvah. So a person who maybe has Alzheimer's, but can physically grasp the lulav and the esrog and shake it, they can do it. There's benefit to that. But what about a person who's deaf and cannot hear a shofar? How do they relate? They can't even do it. How do they relate to that mitzvah? What about people who are physically unable to do mitzvahs? Is it impossible for someone to enjoy the spiritual benefits of a mitzvah they cannot do? Now, normally, you would think, how does a person get credit for doing a mitzvah? Is through actually doing a mitzvah. However, the Talmud says that's not the whole story. The Talmud says one who brings another person to do a mitzvah is considered to have done the mitzvah on their own. It's very powerful stuff. If you bring and cause another person to do a mitzvah, it is as if you did that exact mitzvah. But wait a minute. You didn't do the mitzvah. You caused someone else to do the mitzvah, but you didn't do it. Your ears did not hear that shofar. Someone else heard the shofar. So how could we make this statement? What does it mean that if you cause someone else to do a mitzvah, you get credit for doing a mitzvah? So here we go to the Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe explains to us what happens when a person does a mitzvah. Are mitzvahs a list of do's and don'ts on a list that you can check off or not check off? Or is there something more? The Alter Rebbe writes that the mitzvah creates its own reward. How so? By performing the mitzvah, a person draws down godly energy from above to be integrated into the physicality of this world, that is, in an object which had heretofore been under the dominion of evil and had received its vitality from this evil. The Alter Rebbe says when a person does a mitzvah, you are bringing godliness, spirituality, and a holiness to this world. A physical object which previously concealed and hid the presence of God, a physical object that screamed out, I exist on my own, independent of anything else, now became the biggest spokesperson, right? The biggest poster, the biggest advertisement for the fact that there's meaning and purpose in life as a God who created the world. When you do a mitzvah, you transform a physical object from being a physical object to being a holy, godly object. You draw down into this world godliness and spirituality, and you make this world a better place. So a mitzvah is something that literally changes the world. It's not just rules and regulations. A mitzvah bridges the divide between the spiritual and physical. From this perspective, it doesn't matter if you were the one who physically did the mitzvah. A person who's deaf cannot hear the shofar. However, if that person who's deaf helps other people hear the shofar, makes a phone call, sends a text, right? Helps organize for people who otherwise wouldn't hear the shofar, brings other people to hear the shofar, it is as if they did the mitzvah. Because you know what happened? Because of them, godliness and spirituality entered the world. Because of them, the physical world became more refined, became more sensitive, became more holy. So the bottom line is, a person who is deaf is able to encourage other people to hear the mitzvah of the shofar. And in that sense, it is as if they did the mitzvah because they actually caused the spirituality, the holiness, and the transformation. So we have to remember, mitzvahs are not just a list of do's and don'ts. Mitzvahs impact the world in the most powerful way, and we should do them, and everyone should do them. People who are disabled should do them. People who are exempt should make every opportunity to do mitzvahs anyway. If you're obligated, right, how much more so you should do the mitzvahs. Share them with your friends, allow and enable other people to do mitzvahs as well. So what about people who are physically unable to do mitzvahs? Through encouraging others to do mitzvahs, the disabled person brings about the identical impact of anyone else's mitzvahs as well. Next week, God willing, Tuesday evening, 7:30, we'll be back for 30 minutes of Torah study live. And also look for information about the next JLI course. It's starting on Wednesday, February 2nd, 6 Wednesdays. It's called Meditation from Sinai, Mindful Awareness and Divine Spirituality to help you think, feel, and live more deeply. What we are going to be doing is exploring key Jewish practices and ideas and learning ways of thinking about them so that they really become integrated into part of your life. So we're not going to be doing breathing in and out exercises, but we're going to be learning strategies for incorporating powerful Jewish ideas into your life. Mindful awareness and divine spirituality help you think, feel, and live more deeply. You can sign up on the shul's website. Psychologists and social workers actually and therapists get continuing education credit for it. It's a fabulous course. Look for more information. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.